Here's a very old record made almost a century ago, so don't worry about the sound. The voice belongs to a singer who captivated half the world in the early 20th century, and she was Scottish. In fact, like me, she was an opera singer from Aberdeen. I'm Lisa Milne, and I'm walking in the footsteps of Mary Garden. This garden was planted in memory of Mary Garden, the famous opera singer who lived near here in Belgrave Terrace. And I'm standing in front of that garden now in Aberdeen. And it's almost the size of a small back garden, probably 6 yards across by maybe 8 feet deep. And I feel somewhat ashamed, to be honest, that this is it. This is the biggest tribute that we have, the biggest memorial we have to Mary Garden in Aberdeen. And I find that really sad, considering what an amazing woman she was. I once had a chance to wear some of Mary Garden's jewellery and to drape one of her dresses across my body. And it felt strange, me being a Quiney from Aberdeen and her being a Quiney from Aberdeen, both of us treading the boards, both of us being opera singers. And I wonder sometimes what took her from her home in Aberdeen, cross over to the States, off to France, back to the States, and ending up as being one of the most famous opera singers in the world. Mary Garden, opera singer, 1874 to 1967, lived in this house being 41 D Street in Aberdeen. Jim Brooks is an opera enthusiast and a Mary Garden admirer. Tell me, Jim, looking at this house here, it's quite humble for a woman who wrote about her beginnings in Aberdeen being a bit more sort of ostentatious than this. What's the story behind that?
Well, I think this was the start of Mary Garden creating her legend, Lisa. It's a big, solid, conventional Aberdeen house, but by the time Mary moved here at a very early age, there were 3 daughters and her mother and father, and her grandparents also lived here. Her father, Robert Garden, was a quarry manager, although Mary Garden liked to say that her grandfather owned vast quarries in the northeast of Scotland. So it may not be the truth, it's something better than the truth, if you like, that she would talk about. But it's here that she apparently made her first so-called public performance, singing a little song called 3 Little Redcaps Sitting in the Corn for her family and friends when she was about 5 years old. But if you look down the street from this house, you can see Aberdeen's famous Music Hall on Union Street, and I think it was here that the seeds of Mary wanting to be an opera singer were first planted.
The Music Hall is only about 100 yards away from Mary Garden's early home in D Street, and this is a place that I feel a little bit more at home in, actually. And we're sitting now in the Mary Garden room, which is a cafe in the Music Hall. Tell me, Jim, you were saying that you think that perhaps this is where Mary got her inspiration to sing.
Yes, indeed. When she was a little girl, she was taken here to the music hall to hear the French singer Marie Rose. It's quite interesting that Mary Garden sang all her roles in French, virtually all her roles in French, and was very much in the French style. And Marie Rose was considered the most popular singer in Paris in her early years. Mary heard her apparently singing Ocean, Thou Mighty Monster, and that seems to have planted a little seed in her mind that that's what she would like to do.
Well, I was actually inspired just around the corner, really, in His Majesty's Theatre in Aberdeen. I went to see Scottish opera, and it was a performance of Lulu by Berg, and that was my sort of moment of the light switched on and made me think that, wow, I think I could maybe be an opera singer, because there was quite a few operas that had bored me, and I always had been a bit more interested in song. And in fact, I've quite frequently sung the Ariette Oubliée, which Debussy dedicated to Mary Garden.
Yes.
At what stage did Mary leave Aberdeen?
Well, actually, it was very soon after having seen Marie Rose. When she was about 10 years old, the family went to America to join their father, Robert, who had gone there to try and make a better life for himself. And she stayed in Chicago, she stayed in New York, they spent some time in Boston. They were all over the States, and it was there that her singing was encouraged and that she took her first proper lessons and did so well that she was offered a scholarship, as it were, or rather funding, to go to sing in Paris, where she went in 1896.
Mary Garden singing Sempre Libera. Michael Turnbull, Mary Garden's biographer. Welcome. The first thing I'd like to ask you specifically about Mary is, how did a young lassie from Aberdeen manage to finance becoming an opera singer? Because I would imagine it might not have been particularly easy.
Yes, I mean, for singers like Joseph Hislop and this tenor from Scotland, from Edinburgh, and Mary Garden, they kind of fell into it by mistake. She took part in the Gilbert and Sullivan concert and a number of others, and then was spotted by a local singing teacher who brought her to the attention of a wealthy couple in Chicago, and they agreed to finance her singing by bringing her into the family as a sort of nanny to look after their two children.
Right.
And from that, she developed her voice with the singing teacher, who eventually said to her, "You have to go to Paris," as so many young American singers had gone. And she went with her singing teacher to Paris, and they had a wonderful time looking for a singing teacher. The first one asked her to open her blouse, which sent her into paroxysms of laughter.
I bet.
And another one, his favourite teaching method was to get the young singer to push a grand piano across the room using her chest muscles.
Wow.
But eventually they settled on a good singing teacher that they approved of, And the family that she'd been financed by in Chicago also had a big department store in Paris, and every month she would go along there and get her allowance, and she began regular singing lessons.
What was Mary like as a student of singing? I mean, was she a hard worker?
Yes, very hard indeed. She knew that she only had a talent. That was the only thing that would enable her to survive, because it was a world full of predatory men, managers of the opera house and other singers, and she had to focus very much on her studies and try and improve her ability to perform as much as possible. So she was actually eventually introduced into the opera comique. I've looked at the books in the opera archives, and she was taken onto the books of the opera comique early in 1901. She sat in on rehearsals. She knew the part thoroughly, and when it seemed that the soprano singing the main part of Louise was going to get ill, she was already sitting at the back of the theatre in the stalls, made up and in costume, ready to take over.
This is the song she sang on that fateful night. The whole thing wasn't an accident, as she said in her pretty unreliable memoirs. Like a lot in her life, it was very well planned. That was recorded in 1929. She was 55. This version was done 17 years earlier. The technical quality is terrible, but her singing is fabulous. I'm joined now by my singing teacher, Patricia MacMahon, a fellow Aberdonian. It was interesting for me listening to that recording of Mary singing Depuis le jour, because often she's been referred to as not being a particularly good singer, and to me, listening to that, it's an incredibly beautiful voice in places, absolutely gorgeous.
Absolutely. The cleanliness of the top notes was amazing.
And it's also funny for me to hear the French accent, which, you know, has often been referred to in things I've read about Mary Garden, that people commented on her slightly Scottish accent that used to come through in the French, and you can definitely hear it in things like fleury and she rolls her R's and things like that at the end of the words, which nowadays I think really in the French repertoire we wouldn't be so prone to be rolling R's in our French quite as much as that.
No, there is this fashion that in sung French we have to roll the R rather than it, although if you were doing something in the kind of Poulenc Café Continental, you would do the kind of Edith Piaf type French.
Absolutely. But it's funny as well, just the difference in the style of phrasing, I would say, from that type of singing from the beginning of the century to now. You know, some of the places where it seems to be so pulled about and, you know, almost mangling the music to my ear, which it sounds so alien.
Well, it sounds very much as if she's ruling the roost in terms of singer and conductor, Whereas now, I think it's very much the other way round. She seemed to get onto top notes and decide that she wanted to sort of take 4 beats to that note instead of the 2.5 that was required.
Specifically that aria, which, you know, she famously went on stage, you know, at a moment's notice from her seat in the auditorium to fill in. And I believe that was the sort of first thing she really sang was in the Act 3, it was the Depuis le Jour. How the heck did a conductor cope with a singer who was coming on and being so free? I mean, it must have been a very different atmosphere to work in.
That's what's very interesting when you hear it, because, I mean, she's pulling back, she's putting in rubato where it's not marked in the score.
So do you think that that's the diva in her coming out?
Now we think we have all the answers to how we perform this and how we perform that. I think our knowledge of things is greater. But, you know, if the composer had said a particular thing, is that not the kind of ultimate for that particular song?
I'm supposing that, you know, times have changed so drastically, and from nowadays I would say we're living almost in the age of the director, the opera director, and I would have imagined that possibly in those days there was a fair chance that because it was really the age of the singer, I mean the singers were the kind of big bucks people, they made the money, that possibly even the composers had to come second to what Madame Garden wanted to do. Reading what I've read about her, she seems such a formidable character who just didn't suffer any fools gladly, that I think she probably wouldn't have thought twice about putting Debussy down if she'd so felt at the time. She didn't seem to have much time for Maeterlinck, who wrote the libretto of Pelléas, and I don't think he had much time for her either. So I think she must have been a dreadful person to get on the wrong side of.
Well, that seemed to be the reputation that's sort of written down, that she was a very strong lady.
I'm interested as a singer, you know, in today's opera, as to what would have her performances really been like? I mean, from a physical perspective, what was she doing that other people weren't doing at the time?
Well, she was singing the role of Salome. She scandalised audiences because she played it so realistically, but in fact she wasn't naked in the Dance of the Seven Veils. She had a pink body stocking on, but her acting carried the part and made sections of the audience extremely annoyed. The very religious people objected to the scandalous nature of her performance.
So did Mary actually court her own scandal?
Yes, I mean, she was adept. She had a wonderful facility as a spin doctor, and she would receive the press in her bedroom, sitting in the French manner, apparently, in her big bed, surrounded by the overwhelming scent of flowers. And she would toy with these poor young hacks.
Was it her talent or her ability to manipulate the media that really made her as famous as she became?
The thing is that people like Dame Nellie Melba and Luisa Tetrazzini, known as the Tuscan thrush, just stood there and warbled beautifully. She didn't do that. She had learned in France to a sort of method style of acting where the voice wasn't something separate from the body, but it was integral to the part. And, you know, she approached the part from inside rather than from the external.
Michael Turnbull there. And that approach made her one of the world's great sopranos for the first quarter of the last century. She was Debussy's muse, possibly even his lover. She created roles by other great French composers like Massenet and Charpentier. She liked singing in French, and Debussy loved her Scottish accent. She was also one of the great stars in New York and Chicago. In fact, she was the director of Chicago Opera towards the end of her career, before she went home to Aberdeen. This is where my granny and granddad had their grocer shop at the corner of Albert Street. And my granny used to tell me stories about Mary Garden popping in to do some shopping, I suppose. And my granny always referred to her as being a woman that was always dressed up to the nines and was quite a formidable figure around Aberdeen. And if we look a wee bit further down the road, we can actually see a residence that Mary came to after the war. Jim, can you tell me what prompted her move back to Aberdeen?
Well, Mary Garden had no choice but to come back to Aberdeen. When her singing career finally wound up in Paris, where she last sang about 1935, she lived in an apartment there. And then, well, basically the Germans came into Paris and Mary had to move out. So she came here to 18 Albert Street to stay in her mother's home.
About 45 years ago, she was interviewed for the BBC when she was well into her 80s, but she still sounds fairly formidable. She talks about her approach to singing.
It was born inside of me, Debussy. He's the only one. He gave me the opera, you see, the book, and I never had to ask him anything. I knew every single solitary tone that you had to put on certain things, because it was very dramatic.
Yes.
Very dramatic.
Did he ever alter any of his music for you?
Never. Never. The only thing that interested me was my work, was my engagements, was my creating operas. I created most all I sang. The new ones, you know. Oh, it was wonderful. Nobody to touch them.
But you never kept their letters. It didn't interest you
Letters?
a bit.
Not a bit.
No. You threw them away.
Burnt them.
You burnt them.
Yeah. Just a lot of paper in your drawers there. Oh, I don't care. I have it all in my mind. I think of the people I like, and I forget the people I don't like. You see, so why keep them? And Debussy wasn't a great writer. He used to come over and see Mr. and Mrs. Debussy came over to Paris often, but he was a great person.
And Debussy admired you very greatly.
Oh.
Admired you.
Oh, he was a great, great musician. Oh, God.
Why did Debussy admire you so much?
Because I sang his music correctly. As I say to you, I spoke in my singing, in my notes, I spoke. I can't tell you what I did, but I know what I did on the stage. Debussy was music, but it was also drama. That was the beauty of that. Faust is all singing, Marguerite, but not Debussy. No. Oh, he was marvellous. What a wonderful man. Is he dead?
Yes.
Is Debussy dead, Amy? I don't know.
I'm afraid he is, yes.
Jim, we're walking up Belgrave Terrace in Aberdeen. Can you tell me something about this house and what it meant to Mary Garden?
Well, this is the house that Mary Garden rented in 1948 after the death of her mother, and it's where she lived until almost the end of her life, when she became too unfit to manage the house on her own. It's an upstairs, typical Aberdeen bay window, quite well-appointed flat. In 1940, she had to leave Paris because the Nazis occupied the city, and her ever-faithful maid managed to preserve and hide away a lot of her statues, her ornaments, and some of her big mirrors. There's a famous overmantel that's supposed to still be around Aberdeen somewhere. And after the war, Mary was able to recover these, and she put them into Belgrave and referred to it as her little Versailles. And indeed it was, to some extent.
What led to Mary Garden's departure from the flat here at Belgrave Terrace?
Well, you have to remember that in the 1960s, Mary Garden was well through her 80s. She was becoming increasingly frail, somewhat confused, and I gather that at the end of her time here, she was living alone. So you can see it's quite a big flat. It would have been very difficult for her, I think. There apparently was a gassing accident that could have resulted in a fatality, but one of her neighbours smelt gas and she was saved. She had a bad fall and broke both arms and ended up in hospital here, and after that she really couldn't look after herself, so the last couple of years of her life were spent in the house of David out by Inverurie, where she became increasingly more confused and had a very sad, a very difficult end. She had to be restrained because she imagined she was back in her dressing room in the opera house, and she would try to perform her roles and fling herself around and was in danger of harming herself.
That's an incredibly sad end for such an amazing woman.
Yes, indeed. Someone from Aberdeen became the most famous opera star of her day. Glamorous, headlines everywhere she went, to being forgotten, dying alone and penniless.
I'm back in the garden. It's the height of summer, and yet strangely there doesn't seem to be a flower blooming, and I find that very odd, because Mary was such a colourful woman who ultimately communicated so much joy to the people she performed for. I'm sure we can do better than this.